The phone rang inside the 911 dispatch center, but it wasn't the voice of an adult. It was the trembling whisper of an 8-year-old girl. She said it hurt when she went to the bathroom and begged for help without letting her stepfather know. That call would uncover a home built on fear, control, and silence, until one officer decided enough was enough. Before we dive into this, hit the subscribe button and tell us from where in the world you are watching from. In the beginning, there was silence. Not the comfortable quiet of a home at rest, but the suffocating stillness that comes when a house holds its breath, afraid to wake the monster that sleeps within its walls. 8-year-old Emma sat on the edge of her small bed, her legs pressed together, her body trembling not from cold, but from a pain that no child should know. The digital clock beside her bed glowed 2:47 a.m., and beside it lay the phone she had hidden beneath her pillow for 3 nights, waiting for the courage that only desperation can provide. You see, my friends, there comes a moment in every soul's journey when the choice between speaking and remaining silent becomes a choice between life and death. For little Emma, that moment had arrived with the burning sensation that had grown stronger each day. Each hour, each precious minute that ticked by on that merciless timer her stepfather had placed in the bathroom, her small fingers trembled as she lifted the phone. In that moment, she was not just a frightened child. She was every voice that had been silenced, every cry for help that had been swallowed by fear. And when she dialed those 3 numbers, she was making a choice that would ripple through the lives of everyone she would touch. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice came through the darkness like a lifeline thrown to a drowning soul. Emma's voice, when it finally came, was barely a whisper, but sometimes, my friends, whispers can shake the very foundations of the world. It hurts when I go to the bathroom, and I'm scared. Please don't let my stepdad know I called. On the other end of that call, Operator Janet Morrison had been taking emergency calls for 15 years. She had heard the worst of humanity, had guided people through their darkest hours. But something in that small voice, the particular kind, of fear that only comes from a child who knows that asking for help might bring worse punishment, made her blood run cold. Sweetie, can you tell me your name? Emma Grace Patterson. I'm 8 years old, and I think something's really wrong with me. Janet's training kicked in, but so did something deeper, the maternal instinct that recognizes when innocence is under attack. As she dispatched units to the address that appeared on her screen, she kept Emma talking, kept her connected to hope in a house where hope had been systematically murdered. Emma, honey, there are some very nice police officers coming to help you. They're like superheroes, but real ones. Can you stay on the phone with me until they get there? And so, in the darkness of that suburban bedroom, 2 souls connected across the void, one weathered by years of hearing humanity's cries for help, the other just beginning to understand that sometimes asking for help is the bravest thing a person can do. Officer Daniel Harris had been a cop for 12 years, long enough to know that the worst crimes often hide behind the prettiest facades. When the call came through his radio at 3:15 a.m., something in the dispatcher's tone made him drive a little faster, grip the wheel a little tighter. Beside him in the passenger seat sat Marissa Clark, a social worker whose presence on this call suggested that whatever waited for them at 1247 Maple Street was going to require more than handcuffs to fix. Marissa had learned, through years of seeing the unspeakable, that evil rarely announces itself with horns and pitchforks. More often, it comes dressed in pressed khakis and speaks in concerned tones about discipline and structure. As they pulled into the driveway of the Patterson home, both officers took in the scene before them. The house was a testament to suburban perfection. Manicured lawn, painted shutters, flowers planted in precise rows. But Daniel had learned to read between the lines of domestic scenes. The perfection was too complete, too sterile. Real families leave traces of their lives scattered about toys on the lawn, bicycles carelessly dropped, the beautiful chaos of people who feel safe enough to be imperfect. This house had no such signs of life. When Marcus Patterson answered the door, he was exactly what they expected, and somehow worse for being so predictable. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of smile that never quite reached his eyes. He wore pajamas that looked pressed, spoke in tones carefully modulated, to suggest both cooperation and mild confusion about why officers might be at his door at such an hour. "Officers, good evening. I hope there's nothing wrong in the neighborhood?" Behind him, the house stretched like a showroom, every surface gleaming, every item in its designated place. And there, peeking around the corner from the hallway, was the reason they had come. Emma stood like a shadow made flesh, her small body pressed against the wall as if she could disappear into it. Her eyes were red and swollen, her hair tangled from a night of restless turning. But it was what Daniel saw when his flashlight beam accidentally caught her pants that made his breath catch in his throat. The dark stain was unmistakable. Mr. Patterson. Marissa's voice carried the kind of authority that comes from years of standing between children and the adults who hurt them. "We received a call about Emma. We need to speak with her." A call? From Emma? Marcus's surprise seemed genuine, but Daniel noticed how his eyes flickered to the child in the hallway, how his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Officer, Emma has been having some behavioral issues lately. She's been acting out, making up stories. You know how children can be when they want attention." But Marissa had heard this song before, sung in a dozen different keys by men and women who mistook cruelty for care. She moved past Marcus with the kind of gentle authority that lets a child know that finally the adults have arrived to make things right. "Emma, sweetheart, I'm Marissa. Can you show me where the bathroom is? Asterisk what they found in that bathroom will haunt me until I draw my final breath, my friends. For you see, evil is most terrifying not when it roars and rages, but when it speaks. Softly of discipline, when it wraps cruelty in the language of love and improvement. The bathroom cabinet." When Marissa opened it, revealed Marcus Patterson's arsenal, not weapons of metal and gunpowder, but something far more insidious. Timers. 7 of them, lined up like soldiers. Digital timers, kitchen timers, even an old hourglass that had been turned into an instrument of psychological warfare. Emma's voice, when she finally found the courage to speak, was barely above a whisper. "He says I drink too much water. He says normal kids don't need to go to the bathroom as much as I do. So he makes me wait." "How long do you have to wait, sweetie?" Marissa asked, though her heart was already breaking with the certainty of what the answer would be. "Depends on what I did wrong. Sometimes 30 minutes. Sometimes sometimes 2 hours." Emma's small hands twisted in her nightgown. "And if I can't wait, if I have an accident, then he makes me wear the wet clothes all day, so I remember to. Be better." Daniel had been writing in his notebook, but his pen had stopped moving. In 12 years of police work, he had seen humanity at its worst, but this systematic destruction of a child's dignity, this calculated campaign against something as basic as bodily autonomy, struck him as uniquely evil. "Emma," he said gently, "does Marcus do this to your mom too?" The child's nod was barely perceptible, but it was enough. "He says Mama drinks too much coffee. He says we're both wasteful with water, that we need to learn self-control." Emma looked up at them with eyes that held far too much understanding for an 8-year-old. "But it hurts now. It burns when I try to go, and sometimes there's blood." Marissa exchanged a look with Daniel. They both knew they were looking at a urinary tract infection. Probably chronic, probably severe. They were looking at a child who had been systematically denied one of the most basic human needs until her body had begun to break down. But more than that, they were looking at a soul that had been taught to apologize for existing, to see her. Most basic needs as failures of character. They were looking at what evil looks like when it moves into a house and calls itself love. "Emma," Marissa said, taking the child's small hand in hers, "you did exactly the right thing by calling us. You are so brave, braver than you know." For the first time since they had arrived, Emma smiled, a tiny, fragile thing, like the first flower pushing through snow. And in that smile, they saw what they were fighting for. Sarah Patterson was folding laundry when they found her in the basement, but the mechanical precision of her movements spoke of a mind that had learned to find refuge in routine. When she looked up at the officers, her eyes held the particular emptiness that comes from years of having hope systematically stripped away. She was a beautiful woman, or had been once. But beauty, when it lives under the constant threat of criticism, begins to fold in on itself. Sarah moved like someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible, to speak only when spoken to exist in the margins of her own life. "Mrs. Patterson," Marissa began gently, "we need to talk to you about Emma." Sarah's hands stilled on the shirt she was folding. "Is she in trouble?" "Because she's been acting out lately, and Marcus says, Sarah." Daniel's voice cut through the rehearsed response. "Emma called 911 tonight because she's in physical pain. She has what appears to be a severe urinary tract infection because she's being denied access to the bathroom." The shirt fell from Sarah's hands. For a moment, they saw her as she truly was not the perfect wife she had been trained to be, but a mother whose child was suffering and who had been powerless to stop it. "He says it's discipline," she whispered, and in those words was the entire architecture of her captivity. "He says children need structure, that I'm too soft, that I don't understand what real parenting looks like because I never had a father." "Sarah." Marissa sat down beside her on the basement steps. "Show me your arms." It was not a request, and Sarah seemed to understand that the time for pretending had passed. With shaking hands, she rolled up the sleeves of her cardigan, revealing a constellation of bruises in various stages of healing. Finger-shaped bruises on her wrists, a handprint on her forearm, the physical evidence of love that demanded proof, of ownership. "He doesn't mean to hurt us," Sarah said, and the words came out like a prayer she no longer believed but couldn't stop reciting. "He just gets frustrated when we don't listen, when we're not grateful for everything he does for us." "When did it start?" Daniel asked. Sarah's laugh was bitter, broken. "Which part? The hitting?" "The rules about when we could eat, when we could sleep, when we could use the bathroom? Or the part where he convinced me that I was crazy for thinking any of it was wrong?" She looked up at them, and they saw in her eyes the terrible clarity. "That comes when the last illusion falls away. He married me 6 months after my divorce was finalized. Emma was 6 then, just this bright, happy little girl who loved everyone and trusted everyone. He said he wanted to be her father, to give us the stability we needed." Sarah's voice broke. "I was so grateful. I thought he was saving us." "What changed your mind?" Marissa asked. "This morning," Sarah whispered. "Emma wet herself at breakfast because she couldn't hold it anymore, and he made her sit in it for 3 hours while we went to church. Made her wear a diaper to church like a baby. Told everyone who asked that she had special needs. And I sat there and said nothing, because I was afraid of what he'd do to both of us if I spoke up." She looked at them with eyes that had seen too much, endured too much, been broken and rebuilt too many times. "But when we got home and I saw her trying to hide the blood in her underwear, trying to wash it out in the sink so he wouldn't know, that's when I knew that my gratitude was killing my daughter." Asterisk Marcus Patterson's transformation when he realized the officers were not leaving was something to behold. The concerned stepfather melted away like frost in sunlight, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "This is harassment," he said, his voice taking on the tone of a man accustomed to getting his way through intimidation. "These are family matters. I don't know what stories they've been telling you, but Sarah has mental health issues, and Emma is a troubled child who needs structure." "Mr. Patterson," Daniel said, his own voice hardening, "you're under arrest for child endangerment, domestic abuse, and aggravated assault." As the handcuffs clicked into place, Marcus's mask finally fell away completely. The rage that emerged was volcanic, the fury of a predator who had been discovered in his hunting ground. "You have no idea what you're doing," he snarled. "These women are nothing without me. Sarah can't even hold a job, and that kid is damaged goods from her real father. I gave them a home, structure, discipline. Without me, they'll be on the streets in a month." But his words fell on deaf ears. Daniel and Marissa had heard it all. Before the predictable rage of abusers, when their victims are finally removed from their control. They knew that for men like Marcus, love was ownership, family was property, and any challenge to their authority was an act of war. As they led him to the patrol car, neighbors began to emerge from their houses, drawn by the flashing lights and the commotion. And there, pressed against the window of the police car, was Emma watching the monster who had ruled her life being driven away. For the first time in months, she did not ask permission before running to the bathroom. But my friends, if you think this story ends with the villain's arrest, then you have not yet learned how the world truly works. Evil does not vanish when handcuffs click into place. Sometimes it simply hires a better lawyer. By noon the next day, Marcus Patterson was free on bail, standing in the driveway of his perfect house with his attorney beside him and fury radiating from every pore. The system that was supposed to protect Emma and Sarah had rules, procedures, bureaucratic requirements that had to be followed regardless of the urgency of human suffering. Emma, meanwhile, sat in a sterile room at Child Protective Services, clutching a stuffed rabbit that Marissa had given her, asking the question that broke everyone's heart. "When do I have to go back home?" "You don't, sweetheart," Marissa promised. "We're going to find you and your mama a safe place to stay." But safe places, they discovered, were in short supply. The women's shelter was full. The foster care system was overwhelmed. And Sarah, despite years of abuse, had no job, no savings, no family to turn to. Marcus had seen to that, systematically. Isolating her from every support system she might have had. It was Daniel who made the call that would change everything. Not to the department, not to social services, but to his own pastor, a man who had learned that sometimes salvation requires breaking a few rules. "Pastor Williams," Daniel said into his phone, "I need a favor, and I need it to be off the books." Within an hour, Sarah and Emma were sitting in the basement of Grace Methodist Church, surrounded by women who understood their story because they had lived variations of it themselves. The church's unofficial women's network, part support group, part witness protection program, part Underground Railroad for those fleeing domestic violence. "How long can we stay here?" Sarah asked. "As long as it takes," replied Margaret, a woman in her 60s whose own husband had put her in the hospital twice before she found the courage to leave. "We've got lawyers who work pro bono, therapists who donate their time, and a community that believes in protecting the vulnerable." Emma looked around at the faces surrounding her, women of all ages, all backgrounds, united by their shared experience of survival. For the first time in her young life, she understood that she was not alone, that there were adults in the world whose job was not to control her, but to protect her. That night, she drank 3 glasses of water without asking permission and used the bathroom 4 times without looking at a clock. Asterisk. Marcus Patterson was not a man who accepted defeat gracefully. Within days of being released on bail, He began his campaign to reclaim what he considered his property. He hired private investigators to find Sarah and Emma. He launched a custody battle, claiming that Sarah was an unfit mother who had brainwashed his stepdaughter against him. He painted himself as the victim, a concerned father figure who had only tried to provide structure and discipline to a troubled family. And in the halls of justice, where truth is often less important than procedure, his story began to gain traction. The problem, explained Sarah's court-appointed attorney, is that emotional abuse is harder to prove than physical abuse. And Marcus is smart enough to make his punishments sound like reasonable parenting choices to people who've never lived through them. But Marcus had underestimated the network of protection that had formed around his former victims. Pastor Williams had connections throughout the city. Marissa had allies in social services. And Daniel, who had taken Emma's case personally, was using every resource at his disposal to build an unshakable case. They documented everything: medical records showing Emma's chronic UT, his testimony from teachers who had noticed changes in the child's behavior, statements from neighbors who had witnessed Marcus's controlling behavior. Slowly, methodically, they built a wall of evidence that would be impossible to climb. But evidence takes time to gather, and Marcus was growing more desperate by the day. The private investigators he had hired were getting closer to finding the church shelter. His lawyer was filing motion after motion, demanding immediate custody of Emma, claiming that Sarah had essentially kidnapped his stepdaughter, that it was Emma herself who provided the breakthrough they needed. "I want to talk to the judge," she told Marissa one day as they sat coloring in the church basement. "I want to tell him what Marcus really did." "Sweetheart, that might be scary. Are you sure you're ready?" Emma looked up from her drawing, a picture of herself holding hands with her mother, both of them standing in sunshine. "I'm tired of being scared. And maybe if I tell the truth, other kids won't have to have timers in their bathrooms." The courtroom was packed the day Emma Patterson took the witness stand. At 8 years old, she was barely tall enough to see over the witness box, but her voice carried clearly as she raised her right hand and promised to tell the truth. Marcus sat at the defendant's table in his best suit, his lawyer beside him, projecting the image of a concerned family man wrongly accused. But when Emma's eyes met his across the courtroom, something passed between them, a recognition that the game was finally over. "Emma," the prosecutor began gently, "can you tell the court about the timers?" And so, in her clear, childish voice, Emma described a world that most of the adults in that courtroom could barely comprehend. She spoke of being timed when she went to the bathroom, of wetting herself because she wasn't allowed to go when she needed to, of the burning pain that got worse and worse until she couldn't stand it anymore. She described wearing soiled clothing to church, of being told that her basic human needs were signs of weakness and lack of discipline. She told them about her mother's bruises, about the rules that governed every moment of their lives, about the way love had been weaponized against them. "Emma," Marcus's defense attorney said during cross-examination, "isn't it true that your stepfather was just trying to teach you good habits? That he wanted you to learn self-control?" Emma considered this for a moment, tilting her head with the serious expression that children wear when they're thinking hard about something important. "Do you have to ask permission to go to the bathroom?" she asked the lawyer. "No, but do you get punished if you drink too much water?" "Well, no, but adults are different." "Why?" Emma's question cut through the lawyer's explanation, like a knife through silk. Why are adults different? Don't kids get thirsty too? Don't we need to go to the bathroom when our bodies tell us to? The courtroom was silent as this 8-year-old child dismantled the defense's argument with simple, irrefutable logic. In her innocence, she had asked the questions that the adults had been too sophisticated to think of. When she was finished testifying, Emma walked past Marcus's table on her way back to her mother. For just a moment, she paused and looked at the man who had controlled every aspect of her life for 2 years. "I forgive you," she said quietly, "but I'm never coming home with you again." It was a moment that would haunt Marcus Patterson for the rest of his life, not because it was angry or hateful, but because it was delivered with the kind of finality that only comes from absolute moral clarity. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they returned, their faces told the story before the foreman even spoke. On the count of child endangerment, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of domestic abuse, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of aggravated assault, we find the defendant guilty. Marcus Patterson was sentenced to 5 years in prison with a permanent restraining order preventing him from contacting Sarah or Emma. But more than that, he was sentenced to live with the knowledge that his carefully constructed image had been shattered by the testimony of a child who had found the courage to speak truth to power. The civil trial that followed awarded Sarah full custody of Emma, along with enough financial support to start rebuilding their lives. But the real victory wasn't measured in legal judgments or monetary awards. The real victory was in the small things. Emma sleeping through the night without waking up to check the time. Sarah drinking coffee in the morning without looking over her shoulder. The sound of laughter returning to their voices. "Do you ever miss him?" Emma asked her mother one day as they sat in their new apartment, a modest place with toys scattered on the floor and dishes in the sink, all the beautiful imperfections of people who felt safe enough to live without fear. Sarah considered the question seriously. "I miss the person I thought he was when I first met him," she said finally. "I miss believing that someone wanted to take care of us. But I don't miss being afraid all the time. I don't miss walking on eggshells or worrying that everything I did was wrong." Emma nodded, understanding more than a child her age should have to understand. "I don't miss the timers," she said. "I like being able to go to the bathroom whenever I need to." It was such a simple statement, such a basic expectation of human dignity. But for Emma, it represented something profound, the right to exist in her own body, to trust her own needs, to take up space in the world without apologizing for it. Stories like Emma's don't end with a single family's healing. Truth, once spoken, has a way of spreading like ripples in still water, touching lives and inspiring courage in places far from where the first brave voice was raised. Daniel Harris found his perspective on domestic violence calls forever changed. He began carrying toy animals in his patrol car for children who needed something to hold on to. He started a program training other officers to recognize the signs of psychological abuse that don't leave visible bruises. Marissa Clark used Emma's case to push for changes in how the child welfare system handles emotional abuse. She testified before the state legislature about the need for protocols that recognize psychological torture as being just as damaging as physical violence. Pastor Williams expanded Grace Methodist's underground network, creating a formal nonprofit organization dedicated to providing safe harbor for domestic violence survivors. They named it Emma's House, in honor of the little girl whose courage had shown them all what was possible. But perhaps the most important ripple was the one that spread through the community of survivors themselves. Women who had been hiding their own stories, minimizing their own abuse, began to speak up. A message Emma had sent that children deserve basic human dignity, that love should never come with timers and restrictions, and fear resonated with other victims who had been told their abuse was normal, deserved, or simply discipline. The prosecutor who had handled Marcus's case told reporters afterward, "In 30 years of practicing law, I've never seen a witness as powerful as that 8-year-old girl. She didn't just testify about what happened. To her, she testified about what human dignity looks like. She reminded us all that some things are too sacred to be bargained away, no matter what someone calls it. Healing, my friends, is not a destination, but a journey, one that Emma and Sarah would walk together for many years to come. There were setbacks and struggles, nights when Emma woke up crying, days when Sarah found herself automatically seeking permission for things she had every right to do. At the first breakthrough came 3 months after the trial, when Emma really laughed, for the first time since before Marcus entered their lives. It happened during a simple moment. She had spilled grape juice on her new white shirt, and instead of freezing in terror, waiting for punishment, she looked at her mother and burst into giggles. "I made a mess, Mama," she said, still laughing, not Sarah. Felt tears spring to her eyes as she realized what she was witnessing. A child acting like a child, making mistakes without fear, finding joy in chaos. "Yes, you did, baby, and it's perfectly okay." The physical healing came first. Emma's chronic UT is cleared up once she was allowed to use the bathroom freely. Her sleep patterns normalized. Her appetite returned as she learned that hunger was something to be satisfied, not ignored. But it was the small victories that marked her true progress. Asking for seconds at dinner without apology, drinking water freely during meals, using a bathroom without announcing where she was going. Dr. Patricia Morales, the child psychologist who worked with Emma, explained to Sarah that recovery from psychological abuse often looks different than healing from physical trauma. Emma's nervous system learned to be constantly alert for danger, she said during one of their sessions. Every rule Marcus imposed was like a landmine in her mind. We have to carefully disarm each one. The therapy sessions were difficult. Emma would regress sometimes, asking permission to sit down, to speak, to exist. There were days when she tested boundaries obsessively, as if she couldn't quite believe that love without conditions was real. She would drink glass after glass of water, use the bathroom 10 times in an hour, stay awake past bedtime, not out of defiance, but out of a desperate need to prove to herself that she was truly free. "It's normal," Dr. Morales assured Sarah during one particularly difficult week when Emma seemed to be pushing every boundary. She's learning to trust her own autonomy. She spent 2 years being told her body wasn't her own. Now she's reclaiming. Sarah's journey was equally complex. The physical bruises had faded quickly, but the psychological scars ran deeper than bone. She found herself jumping when doors closed too loudly, automatically deferring to any man who spoke with authority, checking the clock obsessively, as if Marcus's schedule still governed her life. "I keep waiting for him to come home," she confided to Margaret during one of the support group meetings at the church. "Even though I know he's in prison, even though I know we're safe, part of me is still listening for his key in the door." Margaret nodded with the understanding that only comes from lived experience. "I felt that way for 2 years after my ex died. Trauma lives in the body, honey. It takes time to convince your nervous system that the war is over." The support group became Sarah's lifeline. These women, ranging in age from 19 to 73, had all walked variations of the same dark path. There was Jennifer, whose husband had controlled every penny she spent for 15 years. There was Rosa, whose boyfriend had isolated her from her family by convincing her they didn't love her. There was elderly Mrs. Chun, whose son had taken over her finances and medications, keeping her trapped in her own home. Each woman's story was different in its details, but they all shared the same underlying theme: the systematic destruction of autonomy disguised as love, care, or protection. "The hardest part," Sarah said during one meeting, "is learning to trust my own judgment again. Marcus spent so long telling me I was crazy that I overreacted to everything, that I couldn't be trusted to make good decisions. Now when I have to choose something, even something small, like what to make for dinner, I second-guess myself constantly." "That's the invisible prison," replied Jennifer. "Even after the bars are gone, you still feel trapped by them. But there, were also moments of pure joy scattered throughout the difficult months. Emma's first sleepover with friends from school, where she laughed too loudly and ate too much pizza and stayed up too late, reveling in the chaos of childhood. Sarah's return to college, where she discovered a passion for social work and a calling to help other families escape the prisons of abuse. The turning point came during Emma's 9th birthday party, the first celebration they'd had in their new apartment. Sarah had invited Emma's new friends from school, along with some of the children from the church support group. The apartment was small, the decorations were handmade, and the cake was slightly lopsided because Sarah was still relearning how to bake without measuring every ingredient with the precision of someone afraid of making mistakes. But as Sarah watched Emma blow out her candles, surrounded by laughing children, who saw her not as a victim but as a friend, she felt something shift deep in her chest. This was what normal looked like. This beautiful, imperfect, joyous mess of childhood. This was what Marcus had stolen from them. Emma's wish, when she blew out the candles, was whispered so quietly only Sarah could hear. I wish all the scared kids could have birthday parties. 2. It was in that moment that Sarah knew they had truly turned the corner. Emma wasn't just healing from her traumacy, was transforming it into compassion for others, still trapped in the darkness they had escaped. The psychological healing took longer and was more complex than the physical recovery. Emma had to learn to trust her own instincts, to believe that her needs were valid, that asking for help was not a sign of weakness, but of wisdom. She worked with Dr. Morales twice a week, slowly rebuilding her sense of self-worth through play, therapy, art, and careful conversation. One particularly powerful session involved Emma drawing pictures of herself at different stages of her life. The pictures from the Marcus years were dark, with stick figures that had no mouths and tiny bodies that seemed to be shrinking into themselves. But the newer pictures blazed with color. Emma, with arms wide open, mouth curved in a giant smile, standing in sunshine with her mother beside her. Tell me about this one, Dr. Morales said, pointing to a particularly vibrant drawing. That's me now, Emma said proudly. See how I'm big and loud? And I'm drinking water, and it's okay. Such a simple statement, but it represented a universe of healing. The child who had been taught to apologize for existing had learned to celebrate her own presence in the world. Sarah's healing journey included not just therapy, but practical life skills she had to relearn. Marcus had controlled everything from their finances to their social calendar, leaving Sarah feeling helpless when faced with basic adult decisions. The church community rallied around her, teaching her how to budget, how to navigate the legal system, how to advocate for herself and Emma. I feel like I'm learning how to be a person again, she told Pastor Williams during one of their counseling sessions. I was so focused on surviving each day with Marcus that I forgot I was allowed to want things, to have dreams, to make plans. For the future, what do you want now? He asked gently. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, considering. I want Emma to grow up knowing that her voice matters. I want to help other women find their way out of situations like mine. And I want... She paused, as if the thought was too fragile to speak aloud. I want to fall in love again someday. Real love. The kind that makes you more yourself, not less. But perhaps the most beautiful part of their healing was watching them rediscover each other. Without the constant fear and tension of Marcus's presence, they began to see each other clearly for the first time in years. Emma saw her mother not as a fellow victim, but as a survivor and protector. Sarah saw her daughter not as a burden to be managed, but as a miracle to be celebrated. They developed new rituals to replace the oppressive structure Marcus had imposed. Saturday morning pancakes, where Emma could choose her own toppings. Evening walks where they talked about everything and nothing. Bedtime stories where Emma got to pick the book, and Sarah did silly voices for all the characters. "Mama," Emma said, one day as they walked through the park near their new apartment, "do you think other kids have timers in their bathrooms?" "I hope not, baby. But if they do, I hope they're as brave as you were." Emma considered this, swinging her mother's hand. As they walked, "If they call me, I'll tell them it gets better. I'll tell them that there are good grown-ups who will listen." "What else would you tell them?" Sarah asked. Emma was quiet for a moment, thinking with the seriousness she brought to important questions. "I'd tell them that their body belongs to them, that being thirsty isn't bad, that needing to go to the bathroom isn't something to be sorry about." She looked up at her mother. "And I'd tell them that even if the scared feeling doesn't go away right away, they're still brave for asking for help." These conversations became the foundation for what would eventually become Emma's life's work. Even at 9 years old, she possessed a wisdom and empathy that came from having walked through fire and emerged not bitter, but compassionate. The nightmares gradually faded, replaced by dreams of flying, of running through fields, of drinking from clear streams without asking permission. Emma's laughter returned first tentatively, then with increasing confidence, until it filled their small apartment with music that had been absent for too long. Sarah learned to laugh again too, though her healing was more complicated by guilt and self-recrimination. "I should have protected her," she told Dr. Morales during one of her own therapy sessions. "I was the adult. I should have known better, done better." "Sarah," Dr. Morales said gently, "you were a victim too." Marcus systematically broke down. "Your ability to protect yourself, let alone Emma. You did the best you could with the resources you had in an impossible situation. But what kind of mother lets her child suffer like that? A mother who was also suffering. A mother who was isolated, controlled, and abused. A mother who was doing everything she could to keep both herself and her child alive in an incredibly dangerous situation." It took months for Sarah to begin to forgive herself, to understand that survival sometimes requires compromises that look like cowardice from the outside, but are actually acts of profound courage. She had kept Emma alive. She had kept them both alive until the moment came when escape was possible. And when that moment came, she had taken it. As Emma grew stronger, she became increasingly aware of the world beyond her own healing. She noticed things that other children missed: the girl at school who never brought lunch, who always seemed hungry but never complained; the boy who flinched when teachers raised their voices, who seemed to carry the same hypervigilance that Emma recognized in herself. "Mrs. Peterson," Emma said to her third-grade teacher one day after class, "I think Tommy might be scared at home." Mrs. Peterson, who had been briefed on Emma's situation and trained to recognize signs of abuse, knelt down to Emma's level. "What makes you think that, sweetheart?" "He does the same things I used to do. He watches the clock a lot. He asks permission for everything, even to sharpen his pencil. And yesterday, when someone dropped their books, he got under his desk really fast, like he was hiding." Mrs. Peterson felt her heart clench. Through Emma's eyes, she was seeing behaviors she had dismissed as shyness or nervousness in a new light. "That's very observant of you, Emma. Thank you for telling me." Within a week, Tommy's situation had been investigated, and he and his younger sister were removed from a home where their father's military background had been twisted into a system of domestic terrorism. Emma's developing ability to recognize the signs of abuse had saved 2 more children. "How did you know?" Tommy asked Emma months later, when they had become friends, and he felt safe enough to talk about what had happened to him. "I know what scared looks like," Emma said simply. "And I know that kids shouldn't have to be scared all the time." This became Emma's superpower, not X-ray vision or super strength, but the ability to see through the masks that abuse victims. To recognize the signs that adults often miss or dismiss. Dr. Morales called it trauma-informed intuition. the way survivors often develop an almost supernatural ability to spot others who are suffering in silence. But with this gift came responsibility. Emma found herself becoming a bridge between the adult world and the secret world of frightened children. Teachers began to consult with her informally when they were concerned about students. Social workers asked for her perspective on cases involving young children who are too afraid or too conditioned to speak about their abuse. It's a lot of responsibility for someone so young, Sarah worried to Dr. Morales. I don't want her to feel like she has to save every child she meets. The key is teaching her boundaries, Dr. Morales replied. Emma has a gift for recognizing trauma, but she needs to learn that recognizing it doesn't make her responsible for fixing it. Her job is to see and to speak up. The healing has to be done by trained professionals. This lesson was reinforced when Emma became fixated on helping a classmate named Maria, whose mother's boyfriend was showing increasingly controlling behavior. Emma tried everything talking to Maria directly, alerting teachers, even attempting to befriend the boyfriend to assess the situation herself. Emma, Sarah said one evening when she found her daughter crying with frustration, you can't save everyone. And you shouldn't have to. But she's scared, Mama. I can see it, and nobody else seems to notice. Sarah sat down beside her daughter and pulled her close. Remember what you told me you would say to other scared kids? That there are good grown-ups. Who will listen? Well, you did your job, baby. You told the good grown-ups. Now you have to let them do their job. It was a hard lesson for Emma to learn, that bearing witness to suffering was enough, that she didn't have to carry the weight of every child's pain. But it was a necessary lesson, one that would serve her well as she grew into her calling as an advocate for the vulnerable. The church community played a crucial role in both Emma and Sarah's continued healing. Grace Methodist had become more than just a place of worship. It was a sanctuary in the truest sense, a place where broken people could come together and help each other become whole. Emma found particular comfort in the children's programs, where she could be around other kids who understood what it was like to have their childhood interrupted by adult cruelty. There was Miguel, whose mother's ex-boyfriend had terrorized the family for 3 years. There was Ashley, whose grandmother had used food as a weapon of control. There was David, whose parents' divorce had become a battlefield with him as the primary casualty. These children didn't need explanations or gentle handling around Emma. They understood hypervigilance, nightmares, the way your body could betray you with fear, even when your mind knew you were safe. Together, they created a space where healing could happen naturally, through play and laughter and the simple joy of being children who are finally allowed to act like children. Pastor Williams often watched these children play and marveled at their resilience. They've been through hell, he told his wife one evening, but look at them. They're not bitter or broken. They're some of the most compassionate, wise little souls I've ever met. Suffering either breaks you or makes you deeper. His wife replied, these kids chose depth. By Emma's 10th birthday, the ripple effects of her courage had spread far beyond what anyone could have imagined. Her case had become a landmark in family law, cited in courts across the state as precedent for recognizing psychological abuse, as grounds for removing children from dangerous homes. The Timer Protocol, as it came to be known in legal circles, became a recognized form of evidence in custody cases. Social workers were trained to look for signs of excessive control over basic bodily functions, and emergency responders received education about the psychological impact of restricting access to food, water, and bathroom facilities. Officer Daniel Harris found himself becoming an unexpected expert on domestic psychological abuse, traveling to police academies across the region to train new officers in recognizing the signs. His presentation always began the same way, with a recording of Emma's original 911 call. This little girl, he would tell rooms full of rookie cops, changed everything about how we understand abuse. She taught us that you don't have to leave bruises to destroy a person. She taught us to listen not just to what people say, but to what they're not allowed to say. Marissa Clark had used Emma's case to push through legislation requiring mandatory reporting of psychological abuse by teachers, healthcare workers, and child care providers. The law was nicknamed Emma's Law by the media, though Emma herself was still too young to fully understand the significance of having her name attached to legal precedent. But perhaps the most important ripples were the ones that spread through the community of survivors themselves. Women who had been hiding their own stories, minimizing their own abuse, began to speak up. The message Emma had sent that children deserve basic human dignity, that love should never come with timers and restrictions, and fear resonated with other victims who had been told their abuse was normal, deserved, or simply discipline. The support group at Grace Methodist had grown from 6 women to over 30, with a waiting list for new members. They had expanded to include groups for teenagers, for elderly victims, for men who had escaped abusive relationships. Emma's House, the nonprofit organization that had grown from Pastor Williams' informal network now, operated 3 shelters, and a legal aid clinic. Sarah had become one of the organization's most effective advocates, her story resonating with women who saw their own experiences reflected in her journey. She testified before legislative committees, spoke at fundraisers, and counseled women who were still trapped in the early stages of recognizing their own abuse. The hardest part, she would tell these women, is believing that you deserve better. Because by the time you realize you need help, you've been convinced that you're the problem, that you're lucky anyone puts up with you at all. Her favorite part of the job was the follow-up visits, checking in with families 6 months, a year, 2 years after they had escaped their abusers. Watching children rediscover laughter, seeing mothers reclaim their voices, witnessing the slow but steady process of people learning to trust their own instincts again. Mrs. Patterson, one young mother, had said during a recent visit, "My daughter asked me yesterday if she could have a glass of water, and for the first time since we left, she didn't flinch while she was asking. She just asked like it was the most normal thing in the world." "It is the most normal thing in the world," Sarah had replied, "and don't you forget it." The call came on a Tuesday evening in March, just as Emma was finishing her graduate degree in clinical psychology. She was 24 now, engaged to a kind man named David, who had never once questioned her need for autonomy, who celebrated her strength rather than trying to diminish it. Emma's House crisis line. This is Emma speaking. Hi. I don't know if I'm calling the right place. The voice was young, maybe 13 or 14. Female, scared. "You've reached the right place," Emma said gently, settling into the practiced calm that came from years of taking these calls. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Lily Chun. I think something might be wrong at my house, but I'm not sure. My friend gave me this number and said you help kids like me." Emma felt the familiar tightening in her chest that came with these calls, part heartbreak for another child in crisis, part fierce determination to help. "Tell me what's happening, Lily. Take your time." The story that emerged was hauntingly familiar, yet heartbreakingly unique. Lily's parents, both high-achieving professionals, had created what they called a success system for their children. Points were earned for academic achievement, perfect behavior, and meeting increasingly rigid standards. Points were lost for imperfection, for asking questions, for showing any sign of what they called weakness. "They say they're preparing us for the real world," Lily said, her voice small and uncertain. "They say kids these days are too soft, that we need structure and discipline to succeed." "How do you earn and lose points, Lily?" Emma asked, though she dreaded the answer. "Good grades, perfect room, no complaining, that's how you earn them. But you lose points for stuff like like crying or saying you're hungry at the wrong time, or asking to go to the bathroom during family time. And if you don't have enough, points, double quotes, Lily's voice trailed off. What happens when you don't have enough points? No meals. No bed, you sleep on the floor. No bathroom except twice a day, and only for 5 minutes. And you have to do extra chores to earn back your privileges. Emma closed her eyes, feeling the familiar rage that came with hearing how adults could systematically torture children while calling it parenting. Lily, how long has this been going on? 3 years since my dad got the promotion, and my mom decided we needed to be more disciplined to maintain our family's reputation. My little brother Tommy is only 10, and he hasn't had a full meal. In 2 days, because he got points taken away for asking our teacher to explain something he didn't understand in math class. Where are you calling from right now? The school library. I told the librarian I was working on a research project. Lily's voice grew smaller. I'm scared to go home. Tommy wet himself yesterday because he didn't have enough points to use. The bathroom. And my parents made him wear the wet clothes to school today as a natural consequence. The other kids were making fun of him, and he started crying, which made my parents take away more points. Emma felt the old familiar fire ignite in her chest, the same righteous anger that had carried her through years of advocacy work. But now it was tempered with professional knowledge and experience that the 8-year-old Emma hadn't possessed. Lily, you are so brave for calling. What you're describing isn't discipline, it's abuse. Children have the right to food, water, sleep, and bathroom access. Those aren't privileges to be earned. They're basic human needs. But my parents say, your parents are wrong, sweetie. I know they're authority figures, and it's hard to believe that adults can be wrong about something so important. But they are. What they're doing is called systematic deprivation, and it's a form of psychological torture. Lily was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was stronger. I thought maybe it was normal, because they're not hitting us or anything. And our house is nice, and we go to a good school, and everyone thinks my parents are amazing. That's exactly how this kind of abuse works, Emma said. It hides behind success and respectability. The people doing it often convince themselves and everyone around them that they're just being good parents who expect excellence. What do I do? I'm scared for Tommy. He's so little, and he's starting to wet himself at school too. I don't want him to turn out like me. What do you mean, like you? Afraid of everything. Afraid to ask for anything. Afraid to make mistakes. I threw up at school last week because I was so worried about getting a B on a test. And when the nurse asked what was wrong, I couldn't tell her because I was afraid my parents would lose points for worrying people. Emma felt tears prick her eyes. Here was another version of herself, a child so conditioned to see her own needs as problems that she couldn't even accept help when it was offered. Lily, I want you to listen to me very carefully. You are not the problem. Your fear is not weakness. Your mind trying to protect you from a dangerous situation. And the fact that you called for help shows incredible strength and wisdom. Over the next hour, Emma guided Lily through the process of getting help, how to talk to the school counselor, what to expect when Child Protective Services got involved, how to document the abuse she and Tommy were experiencing. But more importantly, she helped Lily understand that she deserved better, that children shouldn't have to earn the right to exist in their own bodies. There's something else, Emma said before they ended the call. I want you to know that whatever happens next, you're not alone. There are people who understand what you've been through, people who will help you and Tommy heal from this. How do you know? Lily asked. Emma smiled, even though Lily couldn't see her. Because I was you once. I was 8 years old when I called for help, but just like you, I was scared and confused and convinced that maybe the adults hurting me were right about everything. But they weren't. And neither are yours. What happened to you after you called for help? It got better, Emma said simply. Not right away, and not without hard work. But it got so much better. I learned to trust my own needs again. I learned that asking for help is brave, not weak. I learned that love, real love, doesn't come with scorecards and point systems and fear. Do you think Tommy and I can learn those things too? I know you can, sweetie. And I'm going to help you every step of the way. The most important thing, she told her audience, is to listen when children tell you something is wrong, even if it doesn't sound that bad to you, even if the parents seem nice, even if the house is clean and the family looks perfect from the outside. She paused, looking out at the faces of the adults who had dedicated their careers to protecting children like she had been. Marcus never hit me. He never starved me. He never locked me in a closet or burned me with cigarettes. But he took away my right to exist in my own body. He made me afraid of my most basic human needs. He taught me that love meant control and that family meant fear. The room was silent as she continued. When I called 911 that night, I wasn't just asking for help with a UT. I was asking for help with staying human. Because when someone controls when you can eat, when you can sleep, when you can use the bathroom, they're not just controlling your body. They're controlling your soul. After her presentation, a young social worker approached her. Emma, I have a case right now, a little boy whose parents make him ask permission for everything, including drinking water. After hearing your story, I think I need to look more closely at what's really happening in that house. Emma smiled, the same bright smile that had first appeared in that hospital room years ago when she realized she was finally safe. Trust your instincts, she said. And remember, children don't usually lie about things like this. We might not have the words to explain what's happening to us, but we know when something is wrong. 3 months after Lily's call, Emma stood in a courthouse that looked remarkably similar to the one where Marcus had been sentenced years earlier. But this time, she wasn't testifying as a victim. She was there as an expert witness, helping. Another family escaped the prison of psychological abuse. Lily sat in the front row with Tommy, both children looking small but no longer broken. The point system that had governed their lives had been dismantled. Their parents had been required to attend intensive therapy, and the children were now living with their aunt, a woman who let them eat when hungry, sleep when tired, and use the bathroom without asking permission. Miss Patterson, the judge said after Emma had finished her testimony about the psychological impact of systematic deprivation, your expertise has been invaluable in helping this court understand the severity of psychological abuse. Thank you. As Emma left the courthouse, she found Lily waiting on the steps. The 14-year-old looked different, still cautious, still healing, but no longer carrying the weight of constant fear. I wanted to thank you, Lily said quietly, for believing me, for helping me understand that what was happening wasn't normal. Emma smiled, remembering another scared child who had once needed someone to believe her story. You saved yourself, Lily, and you saved Tommy. All I did was listen. Will you? Will you keep helping kids like us? Always, Emma promised. As long as there are children who need someone to hear them, I'll be listening.